Welcome, everyone, to the Cancer Research Institute's Patient Immunotherapy Summit. I'm Tamron Hall, and once again, I'm hosting this important event so together we can learn about immunotherapy, a revolutionary cancer treatment that is saving lives. Many of you are here because you or a loved one has been diagnosed with cancer. So let me start off by expressing how very sorry I am that you're going through this. The Cancer Research Institute is committed to fighting against this devastating disease together with you. For over 70 years, CRI has been relentlessly researching, innovating, and delivering results with the mission to create a world immune to cancer. Thanks to CRI, 28 types of cancers can be treated with immunotherapy today, and more than 4 million patients are eligible to benefit from its research every year. Working with scientific experts, oncologists, doctors, supporters, patients, and advocates, CRI funds the best and most promising scientists worldwide.
Welcome to the Cancer Research Institute's Patient Immunotherapy Summit. And the topic of today's discussion is cancer immunotherapy and survivorship. I'm your host, Dr. Ajit Mulay, Assistant Director at the Cancer Research Institute. The topic of today's discussion is something very close to my heart, and I'm sure it is for all our panelists and many of the audiences who are joining us today. Cancer immunotherapy has come a long way. About a decade ago, in 2013, Science, America's leading science magazine, called immunotherapy as a breakthrough of the year and a turning point in cancer care. It is believed for some time that our bodies have the potential to fight the curse of cancer. The need is to unleash this hidden power, and immunotherapy does precisely that. It trains and arms our own immune system to fight against cancer. I can go on and on about the benefits and promises immunotherapy brings to the cancer patients and the possibilities it brings for their health care. But today we want to talk about survivorship. We want to talk about how immunotherapy is impacting the well-being of patients in long run and how it is impacting their lives in more than one ways. We are all aware of the promise that immunotherapy brings in terms of quality of life and long-term health for patients. And it is wonderful to have our panelists who are all cancer survivors and have their amazing stories to share about cancer immunotherapy and survivorship. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for their generous support that has made this event possible. And now I would like to welcome our panelists of today's discussion. First, I would invite Kristen Klenhofer, who will be co-moderating the session with me today. Then we have Brendan Connors joining us from Connecticut. And also we have Dan Engel joining us all the way from San Diego.
Thank you.
I will jump right in and ask our panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their cancer journey.
I'm Kristen Klenhofer, and I'm a 3-time acute lymphoblastic leukemia survivor. I'm also a very passionate patient advocate, and I live in Oakland, California. I was first diagnosed with cancer in 2010, and then I later relapsed twice in 2014. But I just celebrated 9 years of remission with no evidence of disease, and I'm really excited to be here today.
My name is Brendan Connors. I am a stage 4 metastatic melanoma survivor. I was diagnosed back in 2011 and have been cancer-free now for probably about 10 plus years or so. Currently live in Connecticut with my wife and my daughter.
Yeah, Dan Engel, another stage 4 metastatic melanoma survivor. I was first diagnosed in 1999 when I was living in Los Angeles. It was stage 3 at the time. I enrolled in my first clinical trial. That was a 5-year trial on Cancer Vax, that included a little immunotherapy, GM-CSF, starting in 1999. My cancer came back for the first time in 2005. I spent 2 years going between 10 surgeries, radiation, gamma knife on a brain met, and 6 clinical trials. And I've been cancer-free for 17 years now. And They actually called me cured, not just NED. So I will accept that gladly, and I'm glad to be here with you today.
I thought we could talk about how it felt when we were first diagnosed with our cancer and how it impacted our lives. And then also maybe share a story that you could think of that was filled with hope or inspiration during your journey that made a significant impact on your journey. I know for me, it was a total shock and very overwhelming. I had just turned 36 and I was enjoying life. I had no physical symptoms with the exception of a small bump on top of my head, with everyone just thinking it was some harmless cyst that needed to be removed. But much to everyone's surprise, it wasn't harmless. And I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And I just remember my whole world just totally blew up. I learned that I had to enter the hospital in the next few days to start an intense 2-year chemotherapy protocol. I learned that I needed to take off a minimum of a year from work. I also learned that I highly likely would be left infertile because there was no time to preserve any of my eggs. And I remember I was really, really devastated because I'd always hoped to have my own children. And I remember it took a few days for me to really process everything, but I quickly had to move forward on educating myself on my type of cancer because I didn't know what it was. I also sought a second opinion. I did the further testing and scans that were recommended. I got a central catheter inserted. I took that leave of absence from work. I found people to take care of my house and my pets since I would be gone for extended absences. And I also found a new oncologist that would be closer to my mom since she was going to be the one taking care of me at that time. I decided to choose a mantra at the beginning of my diagnosis that would help carry me forward. And I ended up picking a quote by Christopher Reeve. And it says, "Once you choose hope, anything is possible." And the hope wasn't that everything was going to go away like a little fairy tale, but the hope was that I was going to find that strength to get through whatever was going to come my way. And also, my family surprised me. My sister made Choose Hope bracelets with my little mantra, and they passed it out to all our family and friends. And so during my cancer journey, people were constantly sending photos, texts, emails, posting on social media, sporting their Choose Hope bracelets, letting me know that they were thinking of me and they're supporting me. My family also ended up getting custom-made Choose Hope t-shirts, and we would wear them whenever I would start a new treatment. And so that was something that really helped offer a lot of strength and hope and inspiration on my journey. And so I want to ask you, Brendan, when you think back when you were first diagnosed with cancer, how you felt, how it impacted your life, and then if you have a story of hope and inspiration on your journey as well.
So I was first diagnosed, I was only 27, and I didn't realize how big of a deal it was. I went down to Miami on a bachelor party, came back, scratched my back, and I saw blood on my hand, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And my brother was living with me at the time, and I was like, what is that? He's like, oh, that looks like a nasty looking mole, and had never seen it before. Ended up going to the dermatologist, getting it removed. They did some tests, like, oh, it looks like it's precancerous. Then they did a further test, and they realized that it was much worse. And then I got a call right around Thanksgiving that it was stage 4. And I didn't even realize how many stages there were at the time. So I looked it up, and I was like, oh, that sounds pretty bad, but I feel good. Went through the process of figuring out what to do next. Went and talked to a lot of doctors at Sloan Kettering, at Mount Sinai, at Yale. Ended up being lucky enough to get put into a trial down at NIH and NCI. And from there went through 6 rounds of chemo, and then I got put onto a trial for interleukin-2. Did that for about 5 doses or so. Everything was shrinking, and then at one point it wasn't, so they were kind of like, this is all we can do, what's next? And that's when I ended up going onto an immunotherapy trial for ipilimumab and nivolumab up at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York. And that was all outpatient. But being able to have it be outpatient and kind of keep that normalcy in my life of going to work and being with friends, just doing whatever I wanted to do outside of having to do the treatment was really great. I met someone when I was down in NIH and NCI. Her name was Kelly, and her and I became really close. We were going through the same trials. She had lung cancer, but we became really close. She was super happy, super positive, super strong. She ended up passing away, but I took that learning and that relationship that we had with me as I continued to go ahead and to fight. And the one thing that I continued to do, no matter what stage it was at, whether it was the first phone call or even to today, was just to be positive. Because you learn at the end of the day, you can't control it. It's not like you had a choice whether you were going to get cancer or not. So I did my best just to stay positive and control what I can control.
So Dan, I was wondering, how was it for you when you were first diagnosed with cancer? How did it feel? How did it impact your life? And do you have a story of some hope or inspiration during your journey that you want to share with us?
I had had a short haircut, and I was sitting on the steps underneath the skylight playing with my 1.5-year-old daughter. And my now ex wife looked down and said, "Gee, you've got a spot on your scalp. You ought to get checked out." Okay. And I went to a dermatologist. I'd never seen a dermatologist before, who took a biopsy. And then he called me the next day and said, I have your results. I'd like to see you. And I was on my way to a meeting. I was a very self-important investment banker. I thought everything I did was the most important thing in the world. And, I know it's not. But I got to my office and I said, "What am I doing here?" This guy said, "I need to see you." So I had someone else take the meeting, and I went straight to his office, and he proceeded to explain how big an excision they would have to take off my scalp. And that's what started my journey. And we were going to Hawaii 10 days later on a family trip for Thanksgiving. And a friend gave me a book, Prepare for Surgery, Heal Faster by Barbara Huddleston. And it had this relaxation tape with it. And I sat in the hammock every day, 2 times a day, learning to visualize the cancer leaving my head. And I'll never forget, before the first surgery, I had to lay on a steel gurney for 2 hours while the dye traced through my scalp to the sentinel node. And I could feel myself swaying in the hammock. That's how powerful I learned your mind can be. And it changed my life, obviously, but there were only 2 clinical trials in the country at the time available to prevent recurrence. There's 50% odds of recurrence. And shortly thereafter, I started the clinical trial that would be on for 5 years. And I said to my ex-wife, "Your family's in San Diego. My boss is closing the office. Let's move to San Diego and be close to your family so that if we do have a recurrence, you've got a support network." And that was my move to San Diego, and that changed everything.
What kind of treatment options were available to you when you were diagnosed? And if at all you can discuss a little bit about how did you come up to decision of taking the immunotherapy?
Sure. So when I was first diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, the recommended treatment was a standard therapy, which is a 2-year intense chemotherapy inpatient regimen. And so I did that, and it did work. I was able to get into remission for a year and a half. When I later relapsed in 2014, they threw me into salvage chemotherapy. But it wasn't working. The cancer was growing, it was tripling, and I was out of treatment options. And so that's when I started pursuing clinical trials. And I was really fortunate. My oncologist actually knew about a clinical trial that was taking place nearby at an academic medical center. And it was for adults with relapsed refractory acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And it was using a combination of different chemotherapies. And it was a 4-week inpatient study. So I went ahead and enrolled in that. And the whole plan was to hopefully try to get into remission so that I could proceed and do a blood or marrow transplant. And while I was going through that, that's when we first heard about CAR T-cell immunotherapy. My doctor started mentioning it, and it was only 2014. There wasn't a lot of information out there, and it just made so much sense. Using your own immune system to fight cancer, as clearly my body had built up a resistance to the chemotherapy, and I had was being left with toxic side effects. And at that time, there were actually only 3 open clinical trials with CAR T that I would be eligible for. And she applied to all 3. And we heard from Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle, Washington. So they sent me to go collect my white blood cells via apheresis, and it took about 4 hours. And then they took those white blood cells to the lab at Fred Hutch, where they genetically engineered them to recognize the target marker CD19 that was found on my type of cancer. They grew them in the millions, and they stored it for future use. And then I remember the day of my CAR T cell infusion. It was a day we were very, very excited. My mom and my partner Benny and myself were sporting our Choose Hope t-shirts. And I remember my cells arriving in a cooler and them hanging it up. It was just this tiny little bag of white cells. And I thought, wow, what just amazing power that has. The night of the CAR T cell infusion, I did end up spiking a fever, and I was hospitalized for 3 days. And it just ended up that it was a reaction to the infusion. And then I got released. And then on the 4th day after the CAR T cell infusion, I began the anticipated cytokine release syndrome. And that's the inflammatory response of the re-engineered cells going around and attacking my cancer. And I remember, like Dan with visualization, I was visualizing little Pac-Mans going around and eating up my cancer. And I've learned it's not exactly like that because I'm a child of the 80s. I had that visualization. But while that went on, I was hospitalized for 6 days. And the side effects I experienced were those of very much like a very bad flu. But once that all passed, I was released to outpatient monitoring. And I think the thing I realized right away was truly like a week after the infusion, a couple of weeks, I just physically felt so strong, unlike any of my standard treatments I had before. And then about 3 weeks after my CAR T cell infusion, they did a bone marrow biopsy, and no evidence of cancer was found. And we were just so excited. It was just so amazing that it had worked so quickly. I have no long-term side effects from the CAR T cell immunotherapy. For me, it was just so much better than doing chemotherapy. I would do it over and over in a heartbeat. But for me, my journey didn't unfortunately end with CAR T, although I really wish it had. Just given my high-risk leukemia and to increase my chances for survivorship, I did have to proceed with a blood or marrow transplant as the next step in my journey.
I mentioned before, I first started down at NIH and NCI, and ended up being lucky enough to get into that trial. So I was lucky enough that I was young. I had no history of melanoma. I wasn't a smoker. I wasn't a drinker. I did the rounds of chemo, and then I got put onto the clinical trial for IL-2. IL-2 was absolutely wild. I related back so that people can understand to, if you've seen the movie The Fighter, there's a scene in The Fighter where the boxer Dickie Elude is being withdrawn from cocaine and can't control himself. He's in the jail cell. That was like being on IL-2 in between the actual, and you got a dose every 8 hours. And it was just uncontrollable. And then the doctor, he was checking vitals, and he's like, all right, you're good. And I remember telling him, no, I can take one more. He's like, no, actually you can't. Like, you're done. And once they realized that the treatment had only gone so far, I needed to go into a second clinical trial. So for that one, that ended up being up at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And that was the ipilimumab and nivolumab. And I was one of the first to really go on that trial. So we would ask them questions like, hey, so like, what should I expect? And they were like, we're not totally sure what to expect because not many people have done this before. But in terms of the side effects from the ipilimumab and nivolumab, I had to get my appendix out at one point just because the drugs were actually thinking that part of the appendix was actually wrong and it was inflaming it. But for the most part, I was able to continue my actual daily life. There was actually a part where I would get my outpatient therapy, and then an hour later I was playing beach volleyball in New York City and then going out to the bars with my friends. So being able to keep that sense of normalcy was definitely super important.
Remember, back in 1999, there wasn't a whole lot for melanoma. And at stage 3, there was a 50% chance of recurrence in the next 5 years. There were 2 clinical trials available in America at that time, one at Sloan Kettering, That was a vaccine randomized against interferon, and the other was a vaccine developed at the John Wayne Cancer Institute, CancerVax, with GM-CSF, randomized against just GM-CSF. So I knew I was going to get, no matter what, a dose of GM-CSF, which was considered immunotherapy. It's one of the earliest ones. And that went on for 5 years. After 5 years, a year later, I had the first recurrence. I felt something behind my ear. I went to a local ENT in San Diego, took a biopsy. I had another one of those calls the next day of, come on in this morning. We need to see you. And I'm like, now? He said, yeah, now. Drove down to see him. He said, unfortunately, your cancer's back. It's also in your parotid gland. I started a trial at USC with Jeff Weber on a multi-peptide vaccine trial, and I would take the train up every 4 weeks. Got injections into the thigh, not fun. Then I had a recurrence, went back to see full neck dissection again. What's the next step? We recommend you do biochemotherapy, which was 5 days in the hospital. I had to get a double wide port put in. I had vinblastine, cisplatin, dacarbazine, and IL-2 and interferon, 5 days at a time, in a crescendo treatment. And then IV infusion for 5 days after. After 21 days, did another cycle. They did scans. The tumors had shrunk by 50%. After 2 more rounds, the cancer had not totally disappeared, so we had to do another neck dissection, both sides of the neck and right armpit axilla, and then tried a maintenance treatment of GM-CSF and high-dose IL-2. I was hospitalized with that for a few days. So that's more immunotherapy. That had a recurrence shortly thereafter. When the IPI trial opened up, I started on it. And 2 weeks after the first infusion, my neck, I woke up one morning and I had about a half a grapefruit on the side of my neck. Now, I knew that couldn't be the cancer because cancer cells can't grow that fast. And I shared that with Steve O'Day, and he said, you have had the fastest and largest response of any patient who's ever been on this. And I was amazed. And so after the next dose, I had basically 8 tumors that had disappeared. But I went in for my scans before what would have been a maintenance trial that was going to start. And I had a brain MRI and scans. And when doctor came in the room, he said, I need to talk to you. I said, well, I know about the tumor on my chest. And he said, no, you've got a brain met. And my wife had stopped coming to appointments with me. She couldn't deal with any of this stuff. So I had to deal with this all myself. And I just remember crying in my nurse's arms for 15 minutes. So scheduled an appointment for Gamma Knife on the brain met a week later. Then I started a reinduction treatment because there was still cancer, lymphatic around the heart and lungs. And we started a new course of treatment on IPI. And after the first dose, the next scans, I was clean. And at the end of that, I was eligible for a maintenance trial that went on for 7.5 years. So when I say I've had more immunotherapy than almost anybody in the world, I'm not joking. And that was 17 years ago, right about now.
So next, I thought that we could speak about the emotional and psychological impact that cancer might have had on your life, and what role did support systems play in supporting you. I think a lot of people know it truly takes a village to get through a cancer journey. And for me, it was my family, it was my friends, It was those that took care of my pets in my house while I was gone for extended absences. But most importantly, it was my two caregivers. I had my mother and my partner, Benny. They were by my side every single day. I was so fortunate for their patience and their love and their sacrifice. And in addition to that, it was also my amazing medical team that were a huge support system, because we had developed a really strong partnership, and they as well were very strong support for me, as I had doctors from 3 different cancer centers that were all helping to fight for my life. And I was also, as we were talking about, just so grateful for all the medical personnel that helped me along my journey. And so I was wondering for you, Brendan, how can you speak to the emotional and psychological impact that cancer played, and what role did support systems play for you?
Yeah, I think the support systems is really important. And when I was, 27, I didn't really understand it. But chemo brain is definitely a thing. So I had my mom and my dad and my older brother, who happens to be a doctor, in a lot of the meetings with me. And my mindset was always like, okay, like, what are we doing next? And I always wanted to, like, get to the next part, move on, do the next thing. And there was lots of information that was being thrown at me. And in my head, I was like, okay, but like, that's great. But like, what am I doing to like, so a lot of that I would miss, or they would tell me and I wouldn't really retain it. So having them in those meetings definitely helped. And they did a lot more of the physical research. I mean, now obviously you can go to CRI's website and you can find all that information that you need, whereas before there just wasn't a lot of that information then. So having people that were able to like go through and know the questions to ask was super important.
And what about you, Dan? Can you speak to the emotional and psychological impact that cancer had on you, and what role support systems played for you?
I was just a guy who said, I'm going to beat this. And every step of the way, I was like, okay, what's next? If this isn't working, let's go to the next thing. For me, it was, my son's bar mitzvah was coming up, and I said, that's my goal. I'm going to be alive for Sam's bar mitzvah. We made it to Sam's bar mitzvah, and like, okay, next goal 2 years out is my daughter Jordan's bat mitzvah. For me, my mind always worked. Only when I was in the hospital that one night with the biochemo was I so depressed and worried about it. I always knew I was going to beat it. I had a great support network, more friends. As I alluded to, my wife stopped coming to appointments with me. She would drop me off in LA for 6 days in the hospital. It's actually kind of shitty to be in the hospital by yourself like that. And I had other family members come around. But one of the interesting things is you never really know which friends are the ones who can handle it well and which ones just can't handle a cancer diagnosis and what to say and what to do. So surround myself with the people who got it. And I'd like to share this lesson at this point, if you don't mind. I think it's really important when you're going through it, when you have a support network, to be able to say exactly what you need and don't be afraid to ask. Because what happens as a patient is we forget, everyone says, I'll be there for you. What can I do? And you don't really know how to answer. But sometimes you got to say, you know what? My wife's really tired of cleaning the house. Can you come in and clean the house this week? Could you go grocery shopping for us? I need a ride, to get out, go for a walk with me. And you have to, as a patient, be open to asking for what you need at that point in time. Ultimately, this is your time to be selfish, and you have to ask. And you'd be amazed if you ask people for specific things, how much more support you'll wind up getting when you actually ask.
That is very, very true.
That's so true.
Yeah. And it's great because I've seen there's now websites where where patients can say, hey, I need a meal on these days, and these are the kind of foods I like. Or maybe it's not even for them, it's for their family members, so that the family's tired of taking care of you and they don't have to worry about cooking or grocery shopping. I thought we could talk about support groups. And in your experience, how important are support groups, online communities that exist, in dealing with challenges during and after treatment? I know for me, there are just so many incredible cancer resources out there, and I didn't know about a lot of them while I was going through treatment. I found out about a lot of them after the fact. And that's why I'm so passionate about sharing that information with people, because there is a lot of support out there if people want it. I find that for myself, and I think for many others, there's truly a tremendous strength that you get from connecting with others that are on similar journeys. And it's so great that now that does exist, and that there is a lot of one-to-one peer and mentor that you could talk to someone. And then also cancer research. We also have our team of ImmunoAdvocates that are available on the website that you could always reach out to. And if you want to connect with someone who has had a similar cancer diagnosis, and talk to us about our experiences with immunotherapy. And also patient summits. There's a lot of education and resources that are shared, and especially when they're in person and even online, there's an opportunity to also connect with others. So for you, Brendan, maybe you could also talk about, in your experience, how important, support groups are and communities during and after treatment.
Yeah, for me, during, I was, like I said, I was a 27-year-old, young guy who took the approach of, I don't need to talk to anyone, I don't need anything. And so I remember having, nurses come up to me and be like, oh, there's a social worker you can talk to. In my head, I was like, I don't need to talk to a social worker. And now that I'm part of the, advocate group, and I've been able to do podcasts or webinars, and I've had people reach out to me or connect to me on LinkedIn, and being able to talk to people who I've never met before, even if it's just, through whether it's text messages or a Zoom, and just kind of just talk to them. I really enjoy doing that, because even if I can give back a little, or just give any bit of, information or anything that I can share that will help someone in one way, to me, it just makes, the absolute most sense. Where I didn't really feel like that was available when I was going through everything when I was 27. You don't think of yourself as anything more than just who you are, but then other people see the story, they hear the story, they understand what you've gone through, they can relate it back to what they're going through, and you realize how impactful and how powerful that is.
How about you, Dan? In your experience, how important are support groups and online communities, maybe that you dealt with or that you think about during treatment and after treatment?
I think it's so important to be able to talk to someone face to face. So the patient summits, going to those, being able to, everybody who knows me knows, anybody around the world, if you get advanced melanoma, call me and I'll get you an appointment with the closest doctor to you. And you'll get an appointment faster. I view the fact that I'm alive a blessing to be able to help others and tell my story whenever I can. If anybody asks, me to speak, or, I'm there. Doesn't matter what else is going on. If I hear of someone who's going through melanoma or even other cancers, I'm able to be a resource. I don't tell them about experiences related to their cancer, but I can help them get to the right people as well. It's interesting you talk about the peer advocacy groups. I recognize the need for what you went through, Kristen, which was, I want to talk to someone who's been through what I'm about to go through. When they tell you, you're going to be achy. Well, what does that really mean? Could you go to work the next day? I know everyone's different, but did you go to work the next day? Should I plan on skipping a couple things? You just want that you can only get that from a patient.
I thought we could talk about any long-term effects of cancer treatment that you might have, and also speak to how we might be able to improve survivorship care plans to ensure a continuity of care beyond completion of treatment. I know for me, I was fortunate. I don't have any long-term side effects from my CAR T-cell immunotherapy, but the side effects I do have every day are from all my standard treatments with chemotherapy and radiation. They had wreaked havoc on my body, and just the toxicity. I have, cognitive and I have physical impairments because of them, permanent nerve damage with neuropathy. I think I was always kind of an anxious person, but I also think I'm a little bit more anxious now after having had cancer. And unfortunately for me, I did not ever receive a survivorship care plan upon treatment completion. And instead I got a one-page list of cancer screenings that I should make sure I do and some prevention recommendations. But Fred Hutch, they do have a long-term follow-up team that, because I had a blood and marrow transplant, that I could always reach out to with questions or consultations. That's free. But even my medical teams here in California, 2 different hospitals, I never got a survivorship plan. And I truly wish that there was more continuity where everyone for sure got a survivorship plan. And so for me, I've really had to do my own work on attending webinars and conferences and learning what I need to do to live my best life, mind, body, spirit going forward. I was wondering for you, Brendan, do you have any long-term effects from all your treatments, and how was the survivorship care plan for you?
So in terms of long-term effects, in terms of the treatments and the immunotherapy, I don't have any. The only long-term effects is that as part of some of the surgeries that I had, I basically had 2 lymph node dissections on both the right and the left side. And what I didn't know is that if you're removing your lymph nodes, if you go and fly on a plane, you can end up having lymphoma created. So when I fly now, I have to wear sleeves. So I didn't know that the first time that I flew on a plane after that. And my arm just swelled up. And I was like, what is going on? So now when I fly, I just wear basically just like Under Armour sleeves. And it's not really a big deal, but just something that I just continually have to remember when I'm leaving for the airport to make sure that I bring sleeves. And then in terms of the care plan that you were talking about, I didn't get one. I don't think they really had one. They didn't really know because I was so early on in that ipilimumab, nivolumab test that they didn't really know, because it was like, hey, you're going to come back for scans every 3 months. Then it was like 6 months? Sure. 9 months? A year? And then COVID hit, and it ended up being pushed to 2 years. So I went at 2 years, and I talked to my doctor. He goes, so I guess I'll see you in 2 years again. So at this point, we're kind of just making it up as we go along. Hopefully these conversations help, and we can actually create those types of dialogues moving forward for everyone else.
What about you, Dan? Do you have any long-term side effects from your treatments?
I mentioned one of them, the itching, and as we're talking, the bottom of my left foot is firing. You might see me shudder because it just goes nuts. I also, because I had my neck dissected 4 times on one side, twice on the other, and a right axilla, I don't have a lot of range of motion. And I did experience, Brendan, lymphedema. I also have chemo brain to this day. And the last chemo was 18 years ago. And for me, I just lose words. It's not memory. It's just I can't find a word. And I'm sitting there in a business meeting struggling to get a word out, and I just can't find it. And it drives me nuts. As far as survivorships, is the long-term care, that was not even thought of back in 2005, 2006, 2007. The plan was, I got that maintenance treatment for 7.5 years. So I was coming every 3 months and every 6 months getting scans. And so that just went on. We're blessed to be alive, and we're blessed to live in a world where immunotherapy is making a difference and is saving lives. And, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been here. We had to go through trial to get there. Now you all have immunotherapy, and it's awesome.
I want to talk a little bit about immunotherapy. As we know, immunotherapy has advanced so much since you all, like Dan, specifically you, were diagnosed with cancer and started treatments. All of you have been on clinical trials with immunotherapy, and right now immunotherapy can actually treat 28 different type of cancers. And just last year, FDA approved 13 new indications for immunotherapy. So I just wanted to check with all you guys, what is your experience with immunotherapy? What are your long-term thoughts about that? You have seen it come through all these tides and all these hardships. Kristen, what do you think about immunotherapy?
Well, I know that immunotherapy saved my life. My family and I truly believe the only reason that I'm still alive today is because I received that CAR T-cell immunotherapy. And I think what's so exciting is back then there was no CAR T treatment FDA approved, and now since I received it in 2014, there's been 6 FDA approved CAR T cell immunotherapies, plus many in clinical trials. And also now, even for my type of cancer, there's other immunotherapy treatment options that weren't available when I was going through treatment, like Blincyto. And so that's just so exciting that as time goes on and there's more cancer research done, that there's more treatment options that are available that are less toxic to the body, because you're using your own immune system. The immunotherapy is increasing survivorship, is giving many people a gift of more time, like all 3 of us here. It's also changing the treatment landscape. A lot of treatments now, they might have had, you start this and then you do this, and now they can move things around and you have different options. And it's really, immunotherapy is just very novel. It's a very novel treatment. And I'm just really excited as more and more just is discovered. And I know my hope is still that one day, because even still for now, for CAR T-cell immunotherapy, for those with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, you still have to fail 3 treatments before you can get access to that. And so my hope is that one day it will be frontline, that you don't have to go through the toxicities of chemotherapy, or if someone needs radiation, and you could just jump right in and just try immunotherapy.
Sure, that's so well said. Brandon, what are your thoughts about immunotherapy?
Yeah, so to steal exactly what Kristen just said, immunotherapy saved my life. And to know that, you always talk about what's the future? Like, we're living in the future, and the future is now, and seeing how far it's come, and knowing that the trials that I was on, and every time I would do blood work, there was always, the vials that I needed to do for myself. And there was always, you had to sign a form. Like, would you want to also do additional vials for additional research and testing? And I always signed off and said yes on it. And looking back on it, being able to just say yes and do that has, helped move those processes along, and move those studies along, and move those researches along, to where, immunotherapy is today.
I'm one of the earliest immunotherapy success stories in America, so I'm like you guys on the bandwagon. It saved my life. When you can eliminate the that comes with the frontline treatments that just kill every cell in their wake, and you can get to the point where immunotherapy is the standard of care. Kristen, amen. That's what it's got to be. And I think in melanoma, it pretty much is now.
I can surely tell you that at CRI, we are supporting all the immunotherapy research. And one thing that the researchers really want is patient responses, patient stories, and for people to actively take part in clinical trials. So, I mean, all you guys have been in the forefront. You have voluntarily supported clinical trials. Brandon, you have given extra vials just for the research purpose, and I'm sure all the researchers thank you so much. But I just wanted to know your thoughts about clinical trials and how important they are.
Yeah, clinical trials is where the FDA approved treatments begin. And so that's where you're going to get access to the innovative and the cutting edge treatments that are being developed, and try to get access to that breakthrough novel therapies that are being developed. I know that the clinical trials for myself, and I think for all of us here, it offered hope. It gave us a treatment option that maybe, like for myself, I had no treatment options available. So that was just so hope-filled. And I think for many as well, clinical trials can help give them a gift of more time, or at least give them treatment options. And I think as well, the clinical trials are helping to change the whole cancer treatment landscape that we have right now.
Looking back on it, my option was originally just going to be chemo, and that was it. So being on the first clinical trial, that obviously got me started, and that got me into the second clinical trial. You are the one that's helping to kind of trailblaze of what this may do for others. And, being able to be part of that, and being able to know that those 2 clinical trials not only helped save my life, but potentially, I guess not potentially, it has helped save other lives too. It's, it's very powerful.
Look, when I was first diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma, the 5-year survival rate was less than 5%. So clinical trials were just all I had to try to be alive. I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to have been initially treated in a place where I learned about clinical trials. Okay? And then being a patient who understood that clinical trials what was going to get me to live longer. And understanding that what I was doing was also helping others, even if it didn't ultimately help me. I happened to be on the pivotal trial for IPI when it got approved. How amazing is that? Right? So, Brendan, you wouldn't have even had IPI but for the trial I was on, if you want to look at it that way. It's so important for advocates like us to be able to share with people who are afraid, because it is a scary thing. And, they really provide hope. And, they don't work for everyone, but we're getting better at it. And the whole immunotherapy and targeted therapies, we're just making those trials are so much more honed in. And you look at the I Spy trial Laura Esserman has, and where it's adaptive and you don't go down the wrong path and keep going. I mean, there's just great new stuff happening in clinical trials. And so the more CRI is out there helping and providing that research and providing that support, the more we can help people get to those centers of excellence and get the treatment that they need and get them on clinical trials for those who don't have other options. That's the future.
CRI has its own resource for patients who are interested in clinical trials. They can go to the website. There are phone lines available for patients who want to discuss about a clinical trial. They want to know something more about it. So definitely things have really moved forward in terms of how clinical trials are helping people out.
I thought we could think about what's one piece of advice that you could share with those that are listening here today. I know for me, my advice is that knowledge is power. It's very important to educate yourself on treatment options so that you can be involved in making an informed decision on what you want your treatment option to be. It's very important to seek a second opinion at an academic medical center if you're not already at one, to make sure that whatever treatment is recommended is really the best option for you. You want to ask a lot of questions. You want to advocate for yourself. And if you can't advocate for yourself, have someone do it for you. I think the main resource or tool that I would recommend is, using Cancer Research Institute's clinical trial navigators, which are free, or other websites that have that, because they can really hone it down for you on your type of cancer and what treatment options are available, just so that you're aware of what the latest research is and the treatment options that are out there. And all that information is really going to help you make an informed decision on what your doctor might be telling you, and also so that you're aware of what is out there.
Yeah, from a personal perspective, I am of the mantra that you just have to stay positive, no matter what, because I always kept on saying, like, things could always be worse. And people would remind me, like, you have stage 4 metastatic melanoma. And I'm like, yeah, but it could be worse. Like, I could be dead, or, the treatment could not be working. It could always be worse. So being able to stay positive and find the bright side in whatever is happening, because there always is a brighter side, no matter how bad you think it is. Ask the questions, and being able to go to hospitals that have a research academic arm tied to it, and the second opinions, because one doctor may say one thing, one doctor may say another thing, and then once you get all that information, you kind of piece it together, and then you're able to make an informed decision. So at the end of the day, you are your own best advocate, and you have to make the decision of what's best for you.
Absolutely. So true. Dan, what advice would you like to share with those listening? And do you have any resources or tools that you might want to share?
One final piece of advice, and it just came because this experience, when I went to, this breast cancer appointment with my friend, she asked the doctor if there was a patient going through what she was going through right now, one of her patients to talk to. It's so important to be able to have those conversations to really understand what what you're about to go through. And when it comes to second opinions, what you both said, they're important to get them and go to an academic center of excellence. But make sure you have people with you that are consistent to help you evaluate.
Thank you so much for all the participants for their time and sharing these wonderful stories of inspiration with us. I would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors whose generous support has made this event possible. And I invite you all to visit the Cancer Research Institute's website for all the resources that are available for the patients. And I also invite you to watch the Cancer Research Institute's Patient Immunotherapy Summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining the Cancer Research Institute Patient Immunotherapy Summit. We hope you've found this program valuable in your cancer journey. We firmly believe information is the first step toward change, and it can undoubtedly save lives. Thank you to all of our experts for sharing their knowledge and committing their lives to advancing immunotherapy and persevering in the fight against cancer. I thank the Cancer Research Institute for its commitment to this cause, for funding the research that is saving lives, for bringing people together, and for turning the discoveries into groundbreaking immunotherapy treatments that save lives. We are grateful to our generous sponsors that make this program possible and available at no cost to all. I'm honored to be part of this event, and I wish you and your loved ones health and strength. Remember that you can access this program at any time on cancerresearch.org. And if you are interested in scheduling a free and confidential appointment to find a clinical trial for you or a loved one, visit our website at cancerresearch.org/cancer-clinical trials. CRI won't stop until we create a world immune to cancer.